started. Welcome to a brewer's guide to filtering out complexity and churn, or as we call it, the coffee machine talk. The goal of this talk is to show you how to remove the bitterness and churn that comes from complexity and churn in your application. Over the next 30 to 40 minutes, we're going to show you how complexity sneaks into your application, how to recognize it before it becomes painful, and then how to remove it permanently. So let's introduce ourselves and we'll get going. I'll go first. Hello, my name is Alan. I use the pronouns he, him, and I've been using Ruby and Rails for about a dozen years now. I'm from Seattle originally, and so I have coffee like in my veins. My favorite is a New Orleans cold brew with chicory.
Hi everyone, I'm Fito. I use the pronouns he, him. I also have 12 years of experience with Ruby and Rails, and I'm from Asunción, Paraguay, but I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, coming from there today. And like there's one thing I love as much as Ruby, it's coffee. My favorite actually is a pure dark chocolate mocha. I love getting that in San Francisco. So now, Alan and I work together at a company that you might not expect, given that this is a conference for Rails developers. Although hats are the bag, I guess, you've seen us around, but we work for System Meraki, which is the largest Rails shop you've probably never heard of. But we've been friends for years, and we've worked together over the last 9 years at several companies. We've seen a wide variety of code bases. And we spend a lot of time on the weekends just writing code and drinking coffee. You grew up around coffee, right?
Yeah, I did. When I was a kid, they had these mechanical coffee machines in my dad's office, and I was just completely fascinated by them. You drop in a coin and hear it roll down the track and clink into the bucket, and then you make your selection, and the machine would just spring to life. Just hiss and click and whir. And when all of that was over, the ballet was done, that final sound you hear was that splashing of that aromatic black liquid into the cup. Same thing. These days, I'm a little bit more fascinated by the inner workings of software. We both are. And like that coffee machine, there are all kinds of hidden complexity in code. But it doesn't start off like that, does it? How many of you worked on a greenfield application in your time? Quite a few. What was that like? How did you like it? Did it feel fast? Feel like you were moving quickly? Sometimes. What about a legacy application? How many of you worked on a legacy app? Do you review? What about that? How did that feel? Is that as fast? Slower? For us, it feels a lot slower working on a legacy app because we believe that there's a certain point at which a code base crosses a threshold where complexity becomes kind of overwhelming and makes it just that much harder to move through the code base. We want to, when you get to that point, there's like two choices you can make. The first is you can live with complexity as it grows kind of unabated. And you slow further down over time under the illusion that it'll just go away on its own. Or you can pause temporarily, think about reorganizing, and then accelerate development again. We've seen organizations go down both paths. And invariably, when you choose that first path, your engineers are going to get frustrated, and they're going to either leave, or they're going to start to blame Ruby and Rails for the problem. Because it's a Rails thing. But it's not Ruby or Rails' problem. It's not, they didn't do this. We did this to ourselves. We put the complexity into the software. So that's what we want to do. We want to show you how to take that second path so that you're able to get the complexity out of there and fall back in love with Ruby and Rails. We're going to build a little coffee machine, and it's going to add several features that we'll add step by step. We're going to go back over it one commit at a time and look at the complexity that we added. And then finally, we'll reorganize the code to add some new features without increasing complexity. get started. Fito, do you want to build a coffee machine?
Let's do it. All right. So, how does complexity sneak into software? Well, the answer, of course, is one commit at a time, right? So, let's take a look. Now, before, I'm going to show you some code. I'm going to move through the slides very quickly. I just want to show you the shape of the code as it grows. And as the code gets longer, the font size is going to get smaller. So don't try to read everything that's on the slides. Just, it's made up anyway. Just try to follow the shape as it changes. Right? Here is the first commit in our coffee machine. And at this point, the machine does one and only one thing. It serves coffee. First, it dispenses a cup, then it heats the water, it prepares the grounds, it dispenses the water, and then finally it disposes of the grounds. Now, it works great. It's a tiny little app. But it turns out not everyone likes coffee, and so we want to increase sales. So let's add tea. All right, here we've added a conditional to determine whether to serve coffee or tea. And in the process of doing that, we added some duplication. The dispense cup, heat water, and dispense water steps are all duplicated between the two beverages. So naturally at this point, we would dry it out, right? Here's a dry version of the code. Okay, now with both coffee and tea in production, we're starting to get feedback. The most frequently requested feature is to add sweetener. So let's do that. Okay, here we've added sweetener just after dispensing the hot water. Of course, not everyone likes sugar, so we're gonna make it optional. All right, we push this out, customers love it, but now they want cream. Well, since we already have a pattern in place for optional ingredients, let's go ahead and dispense cream right after we dispense the sugar. Okay, for our next feature, it turns out that some folks don't like either coffee or tea. So let's offer them something else, like cocoa. Okay, here we follow the existing pattern, and we added cocoa to the main if statement. But there's no need to add milk or sugar since cocoa is already sweet and creamy. So let's exclude those optional ingredients when the customer is requesting cocoa. Okay, and finally, who doesn't like whipped cream on their cocoa? I don't like it on my coffee, so let's add it. Okay, so whipped cream is an optional ingredient that no one wants on their tea. So let's add it after the other optional ingredients, and we're going to exclude it when the customer is requesting tea. Okay, so here we are. 7 commits into this code base, and we've already got 9 conditionals in one method. It's still relatively simple to understand and to work with this if you are the only one working on it. But if you're part of a bigger team, procedural code like this won't scale. Future developers will keep adding more conditionals with each new feature requested, and that's going to cause complexity to skyrocket. And our little coffee machine has been so successful. That's why we kept adding features, right? We've been so successful that it was just purchased by a big national soup chain. And they didn't want us to add soup to our coffee machine. So that's going to add a lot of complexity. So let's pause here, evaluate where we are, before we try and add any more complexity to this. You want us to do that?
It's okay. All right. So we've reached an inflection point here. Our little coffee machine is about to get too complex. But how can we tell? What is it that tells us to pause and restructure? Well, the first hint was that we had to start reducing font size with every echelon of code we added. And that's actually a pretty good indicator, method length. Sandy Metz has a rule about it. She's the author of Practical Object-Oriented Design or Development in Ruby. No, it's design, right? Yeah, Hooter. She has a rule about it, and it's that you don't put more than 5 lines of code in the method. In addition to method length, we also look at something called method complexity. Our favorite measurement is called the assignment branches and conditional metric. It's a quantitative measurement of how many assignments, branches, and conditionals are in the code. We use a tool called Flog by a guy named Brian Davis, to calculate this ABC metric for us. After it calculates the metric, the higher the number, the more complex the individual method. So we run this tool, we get these numbers. How do we know what's a good number and what's a bad number? So way back in 2008, so Flog's been around for a long time. There was a guy named Jake Scruggs who wrote a gem called Metric Food, and he wrote down these numbers on his blog. Over the years, A, it's the only place we've ever been able to find any guidance on this, but B, we've actually used these numbers for years, and they really do work. We can have a much more simpler, experience with the code just by following these numbers. So what let's do is let's go back through each of those commits and we'll look at the Flog score as we go. So here's our first commit. It weighs in a complexity of 5.5. And according to Jake, that's awesome. So we'll keep going. Now the churn number that you see here is just the number of commits to the file. That'll become important later. Okay, adding the conditional with the duplicated code shot up complexity to 14.6. So we're no longer in that awesome zone below 10, but we're still in the good enough zone below 20. After removing the duplication, the complexity dropped back down. That may seem like a good thing, but this is actually where things start to go south. Started to go wrong, really. There's 2 algorithms here, coffee, tea, or 3 actually, and cocoa. There's only 2 here, but we're intermingling them, and it's harder to see exactly what it takes to brew coffee or to steam tea. That's also setting a precedent for future developers. Like when we added cocoa, we just added another conditional. So from Flog's perspective, though, it's just math. It's seeing fewer assignments, branches, and conditionals, so it thinks this software is less complex. And there's actually a really valuable lesson there. There really isn't a single metric that can tell you what to do with your code. You have to pay attention to how you feel about it. This metric is great, but it has limitations like that. So pay attention to your intuition. If it feels like developing on your application is getting slower, that's a good time to just pause and reflect, think about your design, and decide whether or not it's time to maybe reorganize some code. All right, next we added sweetener. That brought us back up to 13.5. Then we added cream. This is our 5th commit, and that moved us up to 16. Then we added cocoa to that main if statement, and we added the if statement around the sweetener and the cream. And this took us all the way up to 21.3. Now that's actually above that good enough line in 20, but let's see where one more feature puts us. All right, so we topped things off with whipped cream, and that pushed the complexity score over 25. Now at this point, if you look at the trend line, you can see it's starting to curve upward. Plus we did cross over the threshold of 20. So now that's how we knew it's time to pause and reflect. So there's 3 ways that you can know whether it's time to pause and reflect. The first is that method length indicator. If it's getting longer, particularly if you can't fit it on one monitor, like one screen. And I don't mean vertically, I mean horizontally. If you can't fit it on one screen, it's probably too complex. You should probably look at trying to extract some code from that method. Anything over 20, anything under 20 on that Flog score is good enough. You can keep going. And when you get up over like 60, that's when things start getting really dangerous. And if you go back to that other slide, if you get over 100, it's like the alarm bell should be going off. And then finally, how does it feel? How does it feel to write code in your application? Is it slowing down? Do you feel like you're slowing down? If so, take a few minutes, think about your design, and Think about how you might reorganize the code. All right, Fito, you want to take us through refactoring this?
Sounds good. All right, so we broke Sandy's rule. We crossed over Jay's good enough line. And it looked like we were interviewing at least 3 algorithms in there. So that's just pretty dire, right? But is it? Can we turn it around? Yes, we can. Let's do it. All right, so here's the method as we left it a moment ago. Now, code that's dry too early, like we did in our second, third commit, or when you're too eager to remove what seems like duplication, just when you're getting started, can lead you in the wrong direction. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by undrying this code. We're going to add back some duplication to see if there are any missing abstractions, some things that we might have missed as we eagerly dry the code. That might be hiding here in plain sight. And we call this practice rehydration. Take some dry code and you rehydrate it. Now, before I show you what that looks like, there's something important we should talk about. You can't do any of this without tests. The reality is that we don't have time to go over, show you how to write those tests. There's another talk there at some point to make sure that you have enough confidence to do this. But ensuring that you have good test coverage is the very first step to reducing complexity. Now, we really like this tool called SimpleConf. I'm sure you're familiar with this. And we use it to ensure that we tested every line and every branch of code in our applications. As you can see here, we have 100% test coverage. We have 100% line coverage, and that's great, but we also have 100% branch coverage. And that means that we're testing both sides of every condition. That is very important when you're rehydrating code, because you're taking code that was dry, typically involves some conditionals, and you're going to add back that duplication. You want to make sure you didn't miss any side of the condition. So that's going to give you that confidence that you're not inadvertently changing behavior. Okay, so this is where we left off. And since now we've confirmed that our tests are backing us up, we are now ready to rehydrate the code. And that looks like this. Right. Obviously, this increases duplication, but that is what we need to do to find those missing abstractions. Now we can clearly see each recipe, and since there's no overlap in the algorithms anymore, we can safely extract each one of these algorithms into separate polymorphic classes, like this. Right. Now, as you can see, we've moved each recipe into its own class. One for coffee, tea, and cocoa. This structure has a couple of big advantages. Each algorithm is now separate from the others. That means if you should ever need to modify any one of these algorithms, there is a much lower risk that you would inadvertently introduce a bug in any one of them. Plus, the bend method is now much simpler. Now, you might have noticed that there's duplication between the classes. That goes to dispense cup, heat water, and dispense water are all present in every class. We actually want that duplication. It makes understanding the complete algorithms much easier. And since the whole algorithm is now in each beverage class by itself, you don't have to look at the whole thing to understand it. You can just open that one class if you're modifying any one beverage. So we do not want to drive the algorithms per se. Rather, what we want to do is we want to ensure that there is only one implementation of each of these methods. That's really what's meant by don't repeat yourself. It's perfectly okay to call a method multiple times. It's preferable to only implement that method once. Now, as you probably all know, Ruby provides multiple options for doing this. You could include a module into each one of these classes. We could use composition, passing in some sort of driver. Or we could use inheritance and put the methods in a base class. There's trade-offs for each of those. In this case, because we're using polymorphic classes, and because we're unlikely to need any one of these methods elsewhere in the application, outside of beverages, we would probably choose to go with inheritance here. Okay, we're almost done. There's just 2 remaining problems here that we need to address. The first one is that the event method has multiple responsibilities. It's much simpler than before, but still has a few things going on. And second is that that method is not open-closed, meaning that you have to modify that method every time you want to extend it. If we want to add a new beverage type, we have to go in and modify that method. Its only real responsibility, though, should be preparing the beverage. But right now, it's also picking which class to instantiate. And that's really the job of the factory. So let's introduce one. Okay, so here we pull class instantiation out into a factory class. Its only job now is to choose which class to build based on what drink was selected. So now the event method has the one remaining responsibility, which is to prepare beverages. And the event method now is open-close, meaning that we'll never have to modify it again. Every time we want to add a new beverage, we'll have to go or work elsewhere. The event method is not going to change. So we can say now that it is open for extension, but closed for modification. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, didn't we just move the problem to the factory? And yeah, kind of. We've done that. We've also introduced another issue. The build method in the factory now might return nil. And that's going to cause an undefined method error, right? So let's focus on that one first. Let's handle the nil case. We can solve that by introducing a null object, following a null object pattern, like this. So as you can see here, the factory will return a null object, a null beverage object by default. The null beverage is an object that simply has a prepare method that does nothing. Now, that will handle the nil case. For the second problem, though, with the factory, where it's still not open close, we have that same problem, right? Every time we want to add a new beverage, we have to go and modify the factory. Now that's closer to the responsibility of the factory, but it is still going to create some churn in there. So what we can do to solve that is we can introduce a different kind of factory. Give you a second to look at that. All right, so here we've replaced the conditional base factory, which could have been a case statement as well. They're basically the same. We've replaced it here with a factory that's based on a convention and a little bit of metaprogramming. This might look familiar to you. We saw some code like this in some of the talks yesterday, particularly when looking at internals of Rails. There's one problem with this though. It's still not fully open-close either. There are cases that you can imagine. Right now we have this neat set of features where all of our drinks are a single word. But what if we wanted to add something like apple cider or any other drink beverage name that has multiple words? That wouldn't fit neatly in our convention here, so we would have to come in, modify the convention to make sure that it now accommodates that type of beverage. Now, for that reason, and because metaprogramming tends to obscure what's happening, it's more complex to debug, a little bit harder to work with. We tend to treat this kind of factory as an anti-pattern. There's an alternative loop that is open source. I'm going to let Alan tell you all about it.
All right. So let's take a little detour. I'm going to talk about something we call self-registration. It's a technique Fito and I use to solve open-close problems, particularly in factories like this. I'm going to start by showing you what it looks like in our coffee machine app, and then I'm going to go back through it and walk you through the This is where we left off. I've just rearranged the code a little bit so it will fit on the screen. The convention-based factory is here on the left. And in a self-registered factory, what's going to happen is that each one of the beverage classes is going to register itself into a hash that's maintained by the factory. And when all said and done, it looks like this. Now, this is a small font, and some of you are very far away, so I'm going to simplify this a little bit so you can see a little better. These are the only changes. We added one line of code to each one of the beverage classes, and we changed the implementation of the factory to go from being a convention metaprogramming-based factory to a hash-based factory that allows you to register things into it. Let's take a look at how this actually works. There's the factory, and here are the registration calls. Now let's walk back through this, turn the code color back on, and show you, sort of walk you through how it happens. All right, so when this coffee class loads, Ruby is going to parse that file and execute all the lines of code in it. We don't usually think about this much because what we're doing usually when Ruby opens a class file is it's just loading, creating a constant, and pointing it at the code. But here, we're actually running this line of code. Because that method is a class method on the beverage factory, we can just call it. And we're sending it a symbol, and we're sending it self. So self there refers to the coffee class itself. And the symbol is just the key we want to register. So we're going to call the register method, which, as you can see, is just assigning the class to the hash under that key. And then when you call the vending machine, when you call the vend method on the coffee machine, it's still going to call the beverage factory and say build me a beverage. And that's going to hit this code, which is still going to pass options into the beverage as it instantiates it. It's just that the second red box there, that's where it's instantiating, or excuse me, that's where it's retrieving the class. And you can see that if it's there, it'll pull it out of the hash, and if not, it returns that null beverage. If you want to get a little fancy with it, you can tuck that registration code into the base class for the beverage and give it a name. And the name could be something that's meaningful to your application. So in this case, coffee machine, or the coffee class now says that it prepares coffee. The tea class says that it prepares tea. And the cocoa class says that it prepares cocoa. And those calls are just hitting that base class, the beverage class, hitting the class method on there, which then hits the class method in the factory. So Fito and I, we're kind of fancy people. We actually like this DSL approach a whole lot. In fact, we think it adds a ton to the sort of ergonomics of your application, so that the developer is able to more easily, quickly identify what is this code actually doing. So that's self-registration. It's a simple technique that relies on Ruby's interpreted nature, the hash down, to store class instance variables. Excuse me. It relies on Ruby's interpreted nature and a hash stored in the class instance variable on the factory to do three things. The first is that the factory is now open-closed. You will never have to modify it again. The second is that the factory is demonstrably simpler. I didn't show you the flog score on the original one. It's 5.7. That's awesome, right? Why would we improve that? Well, we wanted to improve it because it was not open-closed. This factory has an average method complexity of 1.8, so it's considerably simpler. And finally, the third thing is that we've now encapsulated or co-located that knowledge of what class does what within the application inside those classes themselves. So we've actually improved encapsulation as well. There's nowhere else in the app that you need to tell that the coffee class prepares coffee. So this is such a powerful technique that Fito and I have actually written a gem called Magnifique. It's a gem for managing self-registration. And it's available on GitHub. It includes both the self-registering factories and kind of a nascent dependency injection framework that has a dispatcher. I can go into a lot more detail on that, but we don't have time right now. We're super proud of it, and we'd love for you to take a look and just give it a spin. Let us know what you think. We are open to GitHub issues. We happily take your pull requests. So that was a nice little detour. Let's get back on track, because this is the RailsConf. And that is here up next. So how does our coffee machine stack up now that we've sort of rehydrated the code, introduced that polymorphism, and put a self-registered factory in place?
Let's take a look. Right. Let's see if it worked. So let's start by revisiting this graph that Alan showed us. Here's where we left off after adding the whirring, which was the last feature. And the next thing we did was to rehydrate the code. Now, look at how much more complex that was than the dry solution we had before. Now, this is normal. Complexity tends to end lines of code, tend to go up in the middle of a refactor. That's fine. Remember, dry solution, we hid the fact that it was a missing abstraction. Once we found it though, we were able to pull all these algorithms out into their own form of classes. And that dropped complexity significantly. And finally, we extracted a factory object. And now the complexity of the coffee machine is lower than it's ever been. We're now well back in the awesome range. And the bend method will never need to change again. Okay, now let's take a look at the classes we're left with. There are 7. The coffee machine class has settled down to a very low complexity of 3.9. Remember, we're looking at average method complexity because that's where the build happens. The self-registration based factory has an average method complexity of 1.8, like I pointed out. That's very low. Next, we have the abstract based beverage class, which weighs in at 2.2, also pretty low. And then we have all the concrete beverage classes. And those are a little bit more complex, but they're still well within the good enough zone. And that's where our features live, right? It's fine. There's really not much to do here. This is great. Except that there was a reason we did all that. We needed to add soup to our coffee machine. And we wanted to do so without adding more complexity. So, here's where we left off. Let's add some soup. There you go. Adding soup did not require us to change any of the existing files. As long as the soup class is loaded into memory, it will be available to the factory. And in the future, adding another beverage class will be as simple as adding another class. Oh, and it says, obviously, you still need to disregard. So, want to see that again? Let me go back. And here we are before the soup. And now, this is with it. Nothing else changed. No even the factory, thanks to self-registration. And what we like so much about this is that it doesn't only reduce complexity, but it also eliminates the churn. And if you're not modifying existing code, you're only adding the code, then you're essentially doing greenfield development all the time, right? So we've conquered legacy code. Let's do it one more time. For good measure, let's add apple cider. Ta-da! So, okay, that was a look at a very small greenfield application, but your applications are obviously a whole lot bigger and a whole lot more complex than that. So you might be wondering, okay, so how am I going to know where to start with this when I get back to work? And I'm going to head back to Alan to talk to us about that.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I think I have 12 minutes of content, so I'm trying to go a little quicker than this. So that's great. We looked at this small application, but how do we know where to start when we go back to work? So far, we've really only looked at method complexity. We haven't really looked at the whole app. And it turns out you can use complexity with churn to sort of figure out where to start. So as we mentioned before, complexity is a measurement of how hard it is to understand a piece of code. Churn is a measurement of how often you're changing that code. The way we like to think of it is complexity is how difficult or how much pain you will experience the next time you touch that code, and churn is how often you're inflicting that pain on yourself. So let's look at how we can use those two numbers together to evaluate our whole code base. So you can use a tool like Code Climate or Ruby Critic to generate a plot like this, where it has complexity on one axis and churn on the other. And what this allows you to do is sort of see where each class lies. I'm going to break this into quadrants real quick so we can look at each one. So the lower left is the pain-free zone. These are classes that are easy to modify and easy to understand. In a healthy application, the majority of files should live here. At the upper right is the painful zone. These are the classes that are hard to understand, hard to change, and prone to regression. So be aware that these files exist and be aware that they're in that quadrant. You probably do not want to add more code to those files. If you do feel like you need to modify them, you should probably start with extracting some code out of them. But you don't have to take on all that complexity at once. I forgot, there's two other quadrants. I'll get there. Moving fast. So there's this other quadrant down here called configuration, which is, these are classes that are low in complexity, but they're high in churn. And often what that is configuration data hiding in some Ruby code. So it might be some JSON hiding in there. Try to extract that, put it in a file that Ruby can read when it needs the configuration data, so that the Ruby code itself isn't churning. And then finally, this upper right quadrant, or upper left quadrant rather, is the high complexity files that rarely change. And these would be painful to modify. Because you're not modifying them, you're not experiencing that pain. So Sandy Metz refers to that as an omega test. And her advice, we're with her on this, is to just leave them alone. Don't bother spending your time there. You'll probably break it. It may not be what I tested. Those hardware algorithms are hard to test. So just walk away slowly. Let it be there. It's fine. These quadrants are really helpful, but in fact, they are, in reality, more like this. Many more classes live in that painful zone than what the little quadrant would indicate. This file here is the most complex file. It's super complex, it's being modified all the time. So extracting the hidden abstractions out of that class are actually going to have a major impact on the overall complexity of the whole application. But you might not want to start there. That's your most complex code. You can start here and practice before you go for the code big one. All right, so that's the story of our little coffee machine, how complexity snuck in, how we saw it, recognized it, and how we pulled it back out. A little detour into self-registration. Let's wrap up with some takeaways. So, 3 things. First, complexity is going to sneak into your application. You can't do anything about it, it's going to happen. You just need to be vigilant because it does happen one commit at a time. And you want to pay particularly close attention to conditionals because that's where the complexity comes from. They actually could represent objects trying to escape their method. And remember, try is about method implementation, not about invocation. We have a friend who's in Shashkali, who's a thought life folks in here. His saying is, don't make your code so dry that it chafes. Second thing is that you can recognize that complexity before it becomes painful. So keep your methods short, watch your complexity scores, and pay attention to your intuition. If your intuition is telling you that it's feeling slower, it's probably time to stop. Or if those methods are bigger than 5 lines, the log scores over 20, pause and reflect. Third, you can actually back away from that painful complexity. You can leverage polymorphism and factories to enable you to add new features without changing existing code. You can rehydrate an overly dry code file or reintroduce the duplication into that file to find those missing abstractions that would then be refactored into these polymorphic classes. Okay, those are the three things. Here's some homework. First, go download Flog, run it against your code base. Find out what is the most complex method in your application. Second, go download Churn, run it against your code base, and find out which file has the most churn. This tool is going to look through your Git history and just figure out how many units each file has. Third, find out which class is at the intersection of the two, and has the worst experience of both. You can use Ruby Critic, or you can use code client, thank you, to do this. It's really pretty easy. We think you probably already know which class this is. Show of hands. Who knows what the most complex highest churn class is? We thought so. Go ahead and confirm your suspicions. And then, fourth, we would really love for you to play with that self-registration technique. You can download the Churn if you want, but you can also just do it on your own like we did here. We think it's super cool. We really think it does take you back to that fully greenfield experience. And finally, let us know what you find. Here's how to reach us. Feel free to write, tweet, or toot. Actually, you're more likely to get an answer from toot. We're not really on Twitter very much anymore. You could also subscribe to our blog if you're interested. I talk about this stuff all the time. And if you want to work your way through that little code base, it's on the width tests. And while you're there, you can check out our other personal projects, like this one. This is a VS Code extension called Ridlehoover. We'll put your flog score in your footer so that you can see what the complexity of the currently selected text is, or the current method, or the average score for the entire class. All right, one last thing before we go. Just a reminder, we are from the largest rail shop you've ever heard of, Cisco Rocky. And while we don't build coffee machines, we do build internet machines for coffee lovers. Both Starbucks and Pete's Coffee, as well as some other companies I might mention, who are in the coffee business, they use our devices to connect their stores and their customers to the internet. Our application is about 16 years old. We started in 2007. It's about 1.5 million lines of code. It's a monolith. It's super complex. It's super old. And it supports billions of transactions a day, and is supporting a multi-billion-dollar business. So if you're interested in solving complexity problems, if you're interested in software design and large-scale Rails deployments, please come talk to us. We are here to hire you right now. Thank you for coming. We do have a couple of minutes for questions.
Are you guys going to share the slides?
I will put them on speaker now.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just for fun, did you have the soup in the Apple site that soup original
We have not done that yet, but it sure would. The question was if we put the blog score of everything, like, and added everything to the original if statement, what would the blog score be? Probably over 6.
Kind of a philosophical naming question. I was wondering just your approach. So at the end, your coffee machine was serving tea, and the soup was inheriting from beverage. I just wondered if you were aware of that, and you were like, this is fine, or how do you feel about that? Because that's the kind of thing that would kind of drive me personally crazy, but the code doesn't necessarily need to change.
Yeah, the question is, does it bother us at all that soup is not a beverage? Again, it's inherited from the beverage class. And I will argue the point that soup is drinkable out of the cup.
Or the coffee machine is serving tea.
Yeah. It's definitely stretching the metaphor for sure. And I think if we were really had the time to go into what we probably do in that situation, we'd probably look for more output.
I want to say though, I've worked on multiple bases where they start with, like, have you ever been, like you start with a specific domain, and then you know, a couple of customers go, hey, it would be cool if you added this thing, it doesn't quite fit, but it would be nice, and like salespeople are like, yes, add it now. And then you end up with like, you know, an app that does one thing and a half, and then slowly you might go to the next one. So yeah, it definitely happens. And it does work very well too. But we can always rename it.
All right, we are actually going over. I want to bring this to the next one. So thank you very much for coming.